Mark preferred his drowned in tree sap, but Nala found that stuff a little too sweet, so the duty cook served her patties with a thin layer of a paste made of mashed hazelnuts and cocoa beans that was absolutely divine. Their meal was only half complete when information specialist Almasi Mwangi flounced into the room, and up to the side of their table with a mischievous energy that projected through the whole room. "Oh, pancakes. Good choice," she said, looking down at their plates. And then, with a sparkle in her eyes, she placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, and her other on Nala's shoulder, leaned in close and said, "I suppose I should remind you too that all common areas of the ship are under constant audio and video surveillance by the security office. That's me, you know." Nala did not previously know that humans were able to change their skin coloration, but Mark had definitely turned a shade of red she had never seen before. He also looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Almasi stepped back and laughed. "Don't worry. I encrypted that recording and moved it to my personal top-secret vault," emphasizing personal, in a way that sounded truly scandalous. Mark was trying desperately to figure out how to end this conversation, when Captain Nguyen strode into the room. "Almasi, you messaged that you had something important to tell me." "Yes, Captain. I am super excited to tell you that through a truly creative breakthrough strategy, our favorite biologist and zoologist here collaborated to get our despoilers to start communicating with each other. Baby Talk has cracked the fundamentals, and now my team can start translating the records recovered from the captured ships." "Baby Talk did?" asked Mark, his embarrassment momentarily forgotten. "Yes," said Almasi. "The moment you left the cage room, they started talking up a storm with massive amounts of body language. Baby Talk identified a combination of sounds and amplitude-modulated 1-meter radio waves. When you get back to your lab, I suggest you look into how those are generated." Captain Nguyen said, "Well, that is really exciting news." "Excellent work, you two." Then, looking at their pancakes, added, Almasi, shall we go to your lab and see where your team is at?" And with that, a very happy information specialist and her captain walked out of the galley. As Mark and Nala watched them leave, Mark said as if to himself, "That is a very dangerous woman." Then, turning to Nala, "Would you like to join me in my stateroom?" With the basic principles of the language cracked, a lot of progress was made in the next few months. The despoilers called themselves something that could not easily be represented in the rather limited English phonetic alphabet, especially the modulated radio components, but an approximation of just the oral components, minus the, for lack of a better description, guttural hisses, was Umfaga. And a bulky and primitive Umfag English translation device was slowly being built up. The Umfaga captives themselves were predictably shocked when the device was first turned on in their presence. The idea of other species, even spacefaring ones, being able to talk at all, apparently blew their fundamental worldview. They were truly as xenophobic as a species can be. But progress was made and the device slowly improved. Part 5. Crowded Sky. Crowded Sky. The Killdeer and its 2 captured Umfaga spacecraft had been adrift for a little over 10 months when suddenly the sky got very crowded. Within hours of each other, ships representing the Anglo-Euro Union, the Asia Centauri People's Republic, the Gliese Caliphate, the Union of Cyrillic Communities, and the Confederation Hispanica showed up at the Killdeer site. Captain Nguyen was confused as to how this was even possible, and wondered if the Bantu Republic would arrive soon. Over drinks, Captain Garcia of the CHS Fuerzo told the story to Captain Nguyen. The Dawn Flower contained records about several systems along the transit corridor between Runulog and Ruladen, in addition to the systems that it had explored between Runulog and the point of its demise. These records included several planets that had rudimentary life, but were considered uncolonizable by the Ruladi, in part due to their lack of a stable environment and grass-like steppes. But at least one of these, GK27.4, was perfectly colonizable by humans who are far less picky about details like violent storms and drastic seasonal variations in temperature. But since the Dawn Flower represented the first encounter with a non-human spacefaring race, these records were a matter of public discourse. As a result, 5 of the 6 largest factions sent a colony expedition and supporting warships to protect their claims at roughly the same time, months after the Killdeer had left for Runulog. This resulted in GK27.4 being an unlikely joint colony. Problems have been many, including a complete failure to agree on a better name, so the joint colony is still called GK27.4, much to everybody's displeasure. That the current name is stupid seems to be the only thing the joint colony can agree on. As a result, when the Killdeer shuttle arrived at Runulog, all 5 factions had plenty of warships in orbit around GK, 27.4 with which to respond. Just fabulous, said Captain Nguyen. So the Killdeer gets far more help than it wanted. Tristan cierto, agreed Captain Garcia. Every ranking officer and as many others of the menagerie of ships as could manage it visited the Killdeer and found their way to Cargo Hold 3 to see the Umphaga captives and the Rlati zoologist caring for them. For most of the visitors, this was their first time seeing actual living sentient extraterrestrials. Nala found it entertaining to read their badges and then greet them in their native languages before lapsing back to English for meaningful conversation. The visitors for their part were absolutely thrilled by this courtesy and by what they saw of the lab and the Umphaga. The Umphaga for their part were a good deal less thrilled. They could not figure out who all these aliens were, or why they used the language machine to keep asking the same inane questions over and over. Captain Nguyen meanwhile found himself hosting meeting after meeting in Recreation Room 4, which had been converted to a conference room for the purpose. High-ranking members from each faction were on hand to collectively decide how to establish a diplomatic relationship with the Umphaga. The greatest stumbling block seemed to be that they couldn't even agree on a diplomatic relationship between themselves. Sometimes it seemed to Captain Nguyen that the Killdeer might find itself in the center of a space war. It didn't help that while each faction had allocated one ship that served as their liaison ship, each faction also had multiple warships in the distance providing security, including at least 2 battleships. This was a lot of firepower for an actual conflict, even more for what was supposed to be a diplomatic discussion. Captain Nguyen was desperate to calm things down and kept Almazy close at hand. Each delegate, of course, had their own ideas about what a favorable trade relationship would look like, along with other demands. But fortunately, a relationship with the Umphaga would be so novel that there was considerable overlap. However, the organization of such a delegation was elusive. This was a meeting of high-ranking faction representatives, and Almazy Mwangi was supposed to keep quiet and observe, but she just couldn't stay quiet any longer. I was a part of the Bantu Republic's initial delegation to Runalog, and witnessed firsthand the turmoil brought to the Rlati peoples in that first half year. By having every faction operate separately, a unified species will not be expecting to deal with a divided one, and we risk causing the destructive first contact that we are trying so hard to avoid. I submit that it is paramount that we present the Umphaga with just one delegation headed by just one ambassador. Dr. Abbas, representing the Gleezer Caliphate, nodded. Specialist Mwangi makes a valid point. We do not want to repeat the fiasco of Runalog. I would be happy if our delegation consisted of a lead negotiator or ambassador, aided by a team consisting of a single representative from each faction. I think it is important that the faction representatives provide desires and advice to the ambassador, but the ambassador does all the talking to the Umphaga. Finally, Captain Nguyen spoke up. The fundamental problem is that we need a lead negotiator who is neutral and can speak for all the human factions. It would be particularly helpful if said negotiator actually had experience with the Umphaga and had some understanding of the way they view the universe. The Killdeer happens to have such an individual. Almazy looked startled for a moment and then nodded her head. Representative Kuznetsov of the Union of Cyrillic Communities objected. Dr. Ruthgar is from the Anglo-Euro Union and cannot be trusted to be neutral. We will not accept him. Captain Garcia of the Confederation Hispana jumped in. I don't believe Captain Nguyen was speaking of Dr. Ruthgar, but while we can all agree that Professor Nala knows Umphaga psychology better than anyone, she isn't human. That's the point, said Captain Nguyen. She understands the Umphaga better than any of us, and because she isn't human, she views all humans equally with no regard to faction. Representative Yang of the Azure Centauri People's Republic said, Professor Nala and I spoke in her lab. She is very congenial and smart, but how do we know she will negotiate for humans in good faith? Each faction will have their representative there to make sure that faction's interests are addressed, said Captain Nguyen. All we are asking Professor Nala to do is arbitrate between the representatives of the factions to present a unified and unbiased slate. There was considerable discussion around the room, and Captain Nguyen was seeing that the representatives were warming to the idea. It solved a lot of problems. Then Representative Yang spoke up. It is my understanding that the Umphaga are suspected of eating the Rlati they capture. Surely, a young Rlati woman would be crazy to visit their home planet. I can speak to that, said Almazy. On Reladon, her peers considered Nala crazy for seeking out predators as part of her research. She left Reladon after angering a powerful oligarch in a very un-Rlati way. On the Killdeer, Nala has been working closely with humans for over a year, and certain attitudes have crossed over. I think it is fair to say that by Relati standards she is, in fact, batshit crazy and much bolder than I expected. I'm confident she can be persuaded to accept this role if, in doing so, she has the opportunity to end the despoiler attacks on the Relati herds. Representative Kuznetsov laughed. So you're saying that like the killdeer itself, Professor Nala is Relati on the outside, and practically human on the inside? Interesting. I suggest everybody bring their proposed negotiator to the next session of this meeting. Captain Nguyen, please invite Professor Nala also to meet her team. I want to be present when you inform her of her new assignment. This should be most entertaining. Late in the evening, Captain Nguyen texted Nala asking her to join him in the galley. When she got there, she found him sitting in a booth by himself, sipping a drink called bourbon, made of fermented and distilled grain. Nala had tried it. It wasn't bad. But that very nice Captain Garcia had introduced her to a variation made from a particular desert plant called agave, and that was her new favorite. She helped herself to a glass and joined the captain. Captain Nguyen could smell her drink as she approached the table. Ah, Captain Garcia has made a new convert, I see. He then contemplated his own drink for a bit. Have you met many of the members of the other factions? I don't know what you mean by faction. But I've met quite a few people from the other ships in passing, she replied carefully. It seems like everybody wants to come to the lab and see the Umphaga. I've set up visiting hours to try to keep the captive stress levels down, but I'm a little worried about them. I thought you were not fond of them, said the captain. Oh, I think they are hideous both in appearance and attitude, but they are under my care, Nala said, swirling her drink. Another pause. Nala, let me try to give you a big picture of who all these people are and why they are here. By the time the captain got done trying to explain, Nala badly needed another round of tequila. So, you're telling me, she said, that there is more than one way to organize a government. There is more than one way to select who runs the government, and there is more than one economic model that can be implemented by that government, and that different groups of humans do all of them, and that's what factions are. Yes. And these factions are constantly fighting with each other over whose system is the right system, or over interfaction trade, or over control of resources, or over really just about anything. Yes. And we currently have 5 different fleets of heavily armed ships. Like your petrol around us, and they could fight with each other at any moment? These are the nice people that have been parading through my lab. Well, most of the ships around us are considerably more heavily armed than the old petrol. But they are really making an effort to not fight with each other right now, said Captain Nguyen. They are here to arrange a joint expedition to go meet the Umphaga on their home world. Think about the problem. Each faction wants to bring its own warship, not to point weapons at the Umphaga, but to have the prestige of having that faction represented. But the Umphaga won't see it that way. They will just see a large fleet of heavily armed ships. Each faction will have its own representative to negotiate. But if the Umphaga make a deal with one faction, the other factions may not honor it. How are the Umphaga to make sense of this if they, like the Relati, have always had a unified government, and cannot comprehend a fractured species that is always at war with itself? Nala, the captain continued, you understand how the Relati reacted to multiple human factions. Maybe you can talk sense into these people. The leaders are meeting again at 800 hours tomorrow in Rec Room 4 and would like you to be there. They recognize you as the foremost authority available on how the Umphaga think. Nala cringed. She actually was the foremost authority available, but that only meant that everyone else knew even less than her. She was so wrapped up in that thought that she forgot to consider that Captain Nguyen was probably withholding some key detail about this meeting from her. Again. Team building. At 800 hours, Nala arrived in Rec Room 4 and took her seat between Captain Nguyen and Almasi. Everyone had a placard on the table in front of them indicating their name, title, ship, and faction. Everyone but the members of the Anglo-Euro Union had placards in both English and their native language. Almasi whispered to her that English was generally the de facto common language for multi-faction meetings such as this. Nala noted that the placard in front of her said, Professor Nala, Zoologist, Killdeer. Hers was the only placard in the room to not include a faction, and she wondered why it didn't at least say Relati. But then she had a bad feeling that she wasn't here to represent the Relati. When it looked like most everyone had arrived, Representative Yang of the Asia Centauri People's Republic, the chairwoman for the day, called the meeting to order, and passed control to Captain Nguyen. Captain Nguyen introduced Professor Nala and reported that he had briefed Nala on the concept of factions, and that he had invited her here to share her perspectives on how to negotiate with the Umphaga. He then concluded with the proposal that each faction's representative introduce themselves and their faction affiliation, and then introduce their choice to represent them on the negotiating team itself, and that the identified negotiations representatives stand and remain standing. As chairwoman, Representative Yang went first, introducing her negotiator, Mr. Cho Sung-ho. Around the room, the other representatives introduced their negotiators, Mr. Debir Nas, Professor Jimena de Leon, Dr. Irina Orlova, and Ms. Rose Franklin. Nala looked at the 2 men and 3 women standing up and looking back at her and wondered what exactly was expected of her now. Representative Kuznetsov, grinning like he was enjoying this way too much, nodded at the captain, and then spoke directly to Nala. You see before you 5 negotiators representing 5 factions. They each have their wish list of what they want to get out of the coming trade meeting with the Umphaga rulers. But we don't think the Umphaga rulers will want to, or maybe not even comprehend that they need to, negotiate 5 contracts with 5 negotiators, particularly if there turn out to be conflicts between the contracts. Professor Nala, you are no doubt aware of the fiasco that occurred when only 4 factions landed on Runalog within a month of each other. As the local authority on the Umphaga, what do you suggest we do? Nala warily looked around and tried to dodge. That grin, and a similar one on Captain Nguyen, clued her to where this was heading. The logical choice would be to select one of the 5 to be the lead negotiator and negotiate a single integrated contract, she said. Won't work, jumped in Captain Garcia. Choosing a member of any one faction gives that faction prestige over the other factions. Then he smiled at her. Nala looked around the silent room and all eyes were on her. Once again she looked at the placards before she sighed resignedly. Am I to understand that you want me, a Relati, to head up a human delegation and arbitrate between all the factions while negotiating with the Umphaga? They have been attacking Relati ships for years, and you are asking me to go to their home world, which presumably is infested with billions of the hideous, venomous monsters. Nailed it, said Almazy, putting a hand on Nala's arm. Don't worry, you'll have backup, said Captain Nguyen, swinging his arm around the room, and by extension the 5 fleets around the Killdeer. Nala slid her free hand down her face in a very human gesture of disbelief, and then asked, Do we have anything resembling a plan? Chairwoman Yang said, That's the next order of business. Led Ambassador Nala, we would like you to take your team, waving her hand at the 5 standing humans, to the galley. Have some drinks and get acquainted. The rest of us will spend the next couple of days developing a strategy for getting you and your team in and back out again. After Nala and the 5 members of her team left the room, Representative Yang said, Wow, that went way easier than I expected. Captain Nguyen admitted that he might have a bit of a track record of inviting Nala to meetings, where she was presented with shocking revelations, and she may have been expecting something like this. Captain Garcia contacted his ship and arranged to have the very best tequila in the galaxy transferred from his private stash to the Killdeer exclusively for Nala, commenting, She's going to need it. Nala spent the next several days with her team, getting to know them, showing them her lab, having drinks and dinners and more drinks, and getting a first look at what their proposals to the Umphaga might contain. She tried to imagine how a Relati central government official would react to these proposals as a start to figuring out how to approach the coming negotiations. During this time, Captain Nguyen, with Almazy at his side, continued to participate in the discussions about how to best enter the Umphaga home world system and engage the xenophobic Umphaga leadership in discussions. After nearly a week, they had formulated a plan more or less and briefed the negotiations team. Gunboat diplomacy, said Mark as he and Nala lay curled up in his bed that night. That sounds like something the Anglo-Euro Union would propose. I don't know who proposed it first, replied Nala. But I looked it up and I understand your reasoning. To be fair though, it goes way back. Genghis Khan did something similar using land-based forces. Mark held Nala silently for a little bit and then she continued. After my discussion last night with the captain, I read a little more human history. You have a word that humans need and use an uncomfortable amount that I don't think would even occur to most unified species like the Relati or the Umphaga. Genocide. I really detest the Umphaga, but I was thinking about the fleets of warships the captain said will back me up, and gunboat diplomacy and all the talk. She looked up into Mark's eyes. I don't think I'm going there to get the best contract for the humans. I think I am going there to prevent the Umphaga from doing something stupid and getting themselves killed. Part 6, Riding the Thygia. Setting the table. The records and star maps captured from the Umphaga raider ships showed a species that, other than some mining and the raiding of the Lady Transit herds, had progressed very little beyond their home system. The Umphaga had not established self-sustaining colonies, and apparently their ships had very limited range. There was some indication that they didn't have many ships either. The plan the humans came up with was simple, brutal, and almost certain to end in political and economic chaos for the highly feudal Umphaga culture. The combined human fleets would stealthily take up positions in the system's comet cloud, and then the killdeer would race through the center of the system like a lost and scared antelope, through a pack of hyenas, and led as many Umphaga ships as possible back out to the waiting fleets. If the combined firepower of the Umphaga ships was sufficiently disproportionate to what awaited them at the edge of the system, every attempt would be made to disable the ships and take their crews alive. To this end, the human fleet was equipping itself with the necessary holding tanks for large numbers of prisoners. It was speculated that this approach would provide options in the final negotiations. Then, with the Umphaga defenses negated, the two big battleships would take up imposing positions above the planet and broadcast terms for negotiation on the Umphaga public frequencies to provide pressure, while broadcasting more discreet invitations on certain limited government frequencies. This, Nala thought with incredulity, is the human idea of avoiding a destructive first contact. While the killdeer was playing scared antelope, Almazy took Nala with her into cargo hold 1. About half of it was an electronics lab with bits of the original hunter ships from 6 months ago, still scattered about on workbenches where they had undergone analysis. The other half, as Almazy gave Nala the tour, contained a large number of consoles and massive computing power, all connected to a dizzying array of sensors hidden throughout the killdeer's outer surface. Almazy explained that this was a signals intelligence center. From here they could intercept communications, active sensors and other emissions from the planet and the hunter ships. This allowed them to figure out how to isolate and jam transmissions, figure out who was talking to whom, and in some cases inject false information, either as communications or as full sensor returns, thus confusing the attacking force and disrupting their coordination. Nala had never conceived of anything like this, but on reflection could see how humans would. Snooping and lying seemed to be second nature to these creatures, and this was just an escalation of that behavior. Much to everyone's surprise, the plan actually worked largely per design. A hefty number of Umphaga crew were captured uninjured, and the head of one of the larger clans agreed to negotiate. Nala and her team, along with a hand-picked dozen bodyguards in full armor, took a shuttle to the negotiation site. Negotiations. The whole planet was in an uproar. A prey ship had been spotted entering the system. Reports at the time speculated that it was perhaps a scout or perhaps just really lost. Whatever the reason, it stupidly headed right through the deep gravity well very near the planet itself. Virtually every prey hunter available throughout the system, about 120 of them, took after it, as it frantically climbed for the heliopause many hours away. The prey freighter looked old, unarmed, and on the verge of failure. Even in sublight, its engines were pulsing sporadically. Yet somehow not a single hunter was able to get quite close enough. A few of the hunters had started from disadvantageous positions and were further behind than the others. They were the lucky ones. They managed to get brief messages out before their comm links went dead. Planet-based detectors showed abnormal energy emissions across a broad swath of the comet cloud at the edge of the solar system, and then silence. After a while, the aging prey freighter cruised calmly back to orbit around the planet, this time accompanied by the two largest, most imposing spacecraft anybody had ever seen. Even a casual observer could see they sported weapons to match. Then broadcasts everywhere were preempted by the demand by these terrifying visitors that the Umphaga negotiate. The orthodox belief among the Umphaga was that they were the only intelligent species in the universe, and certainly top of the food chain. When the Relati ships, prey ships in the language of the Umphaga, were discovered many years earlier, Umphaga natural scientists went through quite the mental gyrations to explain how a non-sentient species could be spacefaring. So when the big ships showed up, the Umphaga were suddenly forced to face the idea that an alien intelligent species existed, had shown up in their space, spoke their language, and had bigger guns. It was too much. The very fabric of Umphaga theological and social structure was doomed. Kshin Droma of the Umflogos clan, long considered a heretic and a radical, at least by anybody reckless enough to challenge the powerful Umflogos clan, saw that a civil war was inevitable. To her, the question was how, once the dust settled, the Umflogos clan could come out on top. She desperately needed more information, so she took a daring gamble and answered the call. Dromic Sheen stood now at the edge of the landing site next to the agreed-upon negotiations chamber, and watched an alien shuttle land on the Umphaga homeworld for the very first time in history. She, a couple of attendants, and 20 security guards dressed as attendants but packing weapons hidden in their gowns, watched the shuttle door open. There was no way to be truly ready for what stepped out. 8 bipedal figures covered in artificial armor so that no part of them was visible emerged and formed a crescent, probable weapons in hand. Then one of the prey animals that the hunters bring back stepped out. She was followed by 5. Something else. They were bipedal, but their eyes and movement marked them as probable predators. 2 of them were carrying a large box between them, and the others were carrying what looked like alien furniture. These were followed by 4 more of the armored creatures. Sheen concluded that the prey animal was being offered as a gift, and moved forward to accept her, saying, "I am Dromic Sheen, and I welcome our visitors from the stars." She was stopped in her tracks when the prey animal made sounds and what looked like a formal motion, and the box behind her said, "Greetings, Dromic Sheen. I am Ambassador Nala, and I speak for the humans around and above me. We look forward to finding a mutually satisfying path toward future trade and cultural exchange." Dromic Sheen's worldview was shaken. She didn't know what she was expecting of visitors from the stars, but a talking prey animal definitely wasn't it. And her not-so-subtle reference to the massive ships in orbit was not reassuring either. Dromic Sheen would need to avoid assumptions. "The meeting chamber is this way," she said, turning to enter the nearby building. In the designated chamber, Sheena's staff had set up a table for her to place her data and recording devices along with those of her assistant. Being quadrupeds, the Umphaga don't use chairs, but either stand or lay down. Standing provided maneuverability, and kept the eyes in a good position. Sheen watched with interest as one of the unarmored humans unfolded an item it was carrying to form a quadrupedal piece of furniture, and placed it on the other side of the table. The little morsel called Ambassador Nala folded her legs such that the furniture was supporting her rump, and Nala's eyes were now at level with Sheena's. Behind Ambassador Nala, the humans set up a table they brought with them, and the 5 unarmored creatures sat on their own furniture. Sheen was going to have to learn some new words for all this strangeness. Well, that seemed like as good a starting point as any for a conversation. The aliens and their shuttle returned to their ships above for the night after hours of conversation. Sheen had learned what a chair was, that the 5 apparently unarmed beings were also ambassadors, which Sheen interpreted to mean that they were secretaries to the little morsel that called herself Ambassador Nala. Had learned that the 12 heavily armored and armed creatures were also humans, but that those humans never sat down or lowered their guard for that matter. And perhaps most surprisingly, Sheen had learned that despite appearances, all of the humans were the same species, and their ancestors came from the same home world, while the little morsel was a Relati, and had only met the humans recently herself. The humans had brought some gifts. Most notably, they brought a couple of Umphaga-style gowns made of an unknown material. They were soft, flowed well, and were scandalously bright colors. Sheen would never wear such things in public, but she just might show them off to her mate. The concerning thing was that they were Umphaga style. Sheen didn't rise to Droma by being a fool. Those gowns showed that the humans knew a lot more about the Umphaga than the Umphaga knew about humans. She wondered which of the Umphaga hunters that occasionally went missing over the years had ended up in the hands, they called them, of the humans. The next few days followed pretty much the same pattern. Nala presented some of the proposals from the humans, but Dromic Sheen equivocated while trying to learn more about the humans. It was frustrating and slow. Finally, Dromic Sheen asked for a 5-day pause so that she could confer with the other leaders. In reality, she had no intention of bringing any other leaders into these discussions. She desperately needed to confer with her advisors about strategy and to get her clan armed and stockpiling against the coming chaos. She, along with every other Droma, had lost her precious few hunter spacecraft to the humans, so the coming conflict was likely to be fought on the ground. In orbit, the humans were monitoring transmissions across the planet and trying to glean what they could about Umphaga society and political structure. It was becoming clear that politically, the Umphaga were somewhere between humans and Relati. They had a homogeneous population and a single common language like the Relati, but multiple factions like the humans. There was no one world government. Rather, their home world was divided in 2 apparently slightly overlapping regions, each ruled by a Droma. It was also clear that the entire planet was about to erupt into civil war, but the humans had no idea why. Nala was in her quarters with Mark trying to enjoy some alone time, but her mind was on the negotiations. I'm a zoologist, not a diplomat. I don't understand the Umphaga. Now it appears they are on the brink of worldwide violent social chaos, and I fear they will try to drag the humans into it. That will not end well. She buried her head into his neck. Mark asked her, "Have you tried talking to them?" Nala shook her head. "Oh, the ambassadors from the factions? We talk all the time. They are at a loss too." Mark stroked her shoulder. "No, the Umphaga. The ones in our lab. They have a vested interest in this situation and may have some ideas." The next day Nala rounded up her team, and the 6 of them, Nala and the 5 human ambassadors, went to Cargo Hold 3. With data units, recordings, and giant monitors to talk to the Umphaga captives. The ambassadors explained that the ship was currently orbiting the Umphaga home world, and they explained as best they could what the situation was, including showing video of the capture of the hunter ships. And the many holding cells of captured Umphaga crews spread out across the ships of the human combined fleet. They even showed the captives some of the conversations with Droma Sheehan. The captives had been in the cell for months and had no idea that they were now orbiting their own planet. The shock was immeasurable, but their responses did start to explain why the world beneath them was descending into chaos. Perhaps just as significantly partway through the emotional firestorm of the day, Nala realized with some shame and self-awareness that although these people had been in her lab for months, her loathing had been so great that she had never bothered to learn their names. The team met again with the captives over the next 2 days and started showing them intercepted news transmissions and soliciting their analysis of what it all meant. This particular crew answered to a different Droma, but at heart they were all Umphaga, and did not want to see their home destroyed. As these sessions wore on and the team began to internalize just what the real social and political situation on the ground was, the human ambassadors started going back to their factions and talking to those captives as well as to the human leaders. With clarity setting in, on the 4th day of the pause in negotiations, Nala urgently asked Representative Kuznetsov to convene the Council of Leaders. Nala looked around the room of now familiar faces and started her presentation. "We currently have in our possession 1,181 Umphaga prisoners, 575 males, and 606 females, taken from 121 hunter ships. That includes the 6 prisoners in my possession. Months ago we had a 7th prisoner that was injured. We treated him and tried to put him into the cage with the other 6. Ms. Mwangi, please show the security footage." After the footage played and the assemblage had a moment to get over their revulsion, Nala continued, "This is not an aberration. The Umphaga are deeply xenophobic, and to be operated on by an alien species, or indeed to even be captured and held by one, makes an individual irrecoverably unclean. Even as we orbit their home world, our guests cannot go home. They will be killed. I suggest to this council that the Umphaga and ourselves are no longer prisoners of war, but rather refugees. What are we to do with them?" There was a long pause, and then an even longer period of urgent murmuring among the assembled humans. Everybody had their datapads out and messages were flying between the ships of the combined fleet. Suddenly, Captain Wilson of the Anglo-Euro Union and Representative Yang of the Asia Centauri People's Republic asked for recognition at the same time. In the ensuing silence, Representative Yang laughed and said, "Captain Wilson, I believe your family history makes you more qualified to present this option." Captain Wilson squinted across the room at Representative Yang in recognition of the teasing and then addressed the room. "Well, the Sheila from the YRG and me got to thinkin' we could drop him off out. Whoop whoop. We're thinkin', with a bit of hard yakka, maybe GK 10.2 from the Dawnflower survey would make a nice new stria for our mates." There was a pause in which the assemblage processed Captain Wilson's unique take on the language, undoubtedly exaggerated just to irritate Representative Yang. Then Captain Garcia said, "Oh, I like that idea. Large parts of the southern hemisphere of GK 10.2 are actually pretty similar to the Umphaga home world, meaning pretty uncomfortable to the rest of us. We could set up a human colony in the northern hemisphere and an Umphaga colony in the south so that we have ready access to help them out with supplies and get them started." Dr. Abbas chimed in. "To make it less like a penal colony, I suggest we offer that they would be free to go back to their home world whenever they think it is safe enough to. Nonetheless, I second Captain Wilson's choice of name, New Australia. It certainly fits." The final day of the pause in negotiations started with moving the now refugees from the lab in the Killdeer to much nicer accommodations on one of the other ships that had more room for such things. Nala took the opportunity to visit several of the other ships and check on the other Umphaga as well. She was surprised, although by now she shouldn't have been, at the wide range of comforts the different vessels offered. Some were cramped, single-purpose weapons platforms. Some were vast, with public spaces finer than the best luxury yachts and everything in between. It was a way more eclectic armada than Nala had previously realized. When all 1,181 Umfaga refugees met each other for the first time on New Australia, they were going to have a lot to talk about. In the evening, Nala and her team met over dinner and drinks, and scripted a strategy for the next day's meeting. When negotiations resumed the following day, they started pretty much like they had a week before. The shuttle landed, the humans made their way to the meeting chamber, and the two delegations, Umfaga and human, faced off across Droma Shian's table. Droma Zieno was thinking about how to begin, when the little morsel moved over to within grasping range of Zieno's tentacle cluster. A bold or foolish move for a prey animal, thought a disconcerted Zieno. Droma Zieno, I respectfully request that you and I confer one-on-one alone, said Nala. Zieno was intrigued, and soon the room was clear except for Zieno, and the little morsel calmly sitting well within range of Zieno's poison barb. Tell me why I'm not already eating you, little morsel, said Zieno. Well, said Nala calmly, let's set aside for now discussion of two battleships full of humans that would be annoyed if anything were to happen to me, and focus instead on how this could benefit you. I don't see any benefits for me or my people. I will never surrender my people into subjugation to a bunch of aliens, least of all to a little morsel like you. We are not asking you to surrender. We are asking you to allocate a substantial amount of suitable Flogo's clan territory so that the humans can build a spaceport and trading post. The trade itself can be expected to enrich your clan. Your humans have two large and heavily armed ships in orbit. You could destroy us, but you haven't. You could conquer us, but you say you won't. You say you want to trade, but why trade for what you can just take? Nala thought about it and chose her words carefully. They can take your possessions, your life, your world, but they cannot take your mind, and it is the Umfaga minds that they want. They want to trade ideas. You and I may look nothing alike nor communicate in the same way, but culturally and philosophically, the Umfaga and the Relati are more like each other than either of us are like the humans. To understand what humans want, you need to understand a little better how humans see the galaxy around them. Nala explained that both the Relati and the Umfaga had a single language and thought of themselves as one people. As such, neither the Relati nor the Umfaga ever considered if other intelligent species existed, or how they would talk to them. The humans, however, came from a divided world of tremendous variation. Thus, when humans looked to the stars, they assumed they would find intelligent life drastically different from themselves. Humans started imagining how they would talk to and interact with alien life long before they left their home world and actually encountered alien life. That is why the humans were able to build that machine, said Nala, indicating the translator. What? Talk to aliens at all? What is it the humans are looking for? What drives them? Asked Zieno. Fear, said Nala. Consider this. I used to have nightmares about the Umfaga capturing my ship and eating me. I'm sure that tonight many Umfaga will look up at those two ships in orbit and have nightmares about humans. Think about the power that you have seen humans project a full 45 light years from their home world, and now try to imagine what could possibly give humans nightmares. After a pause to let Zieno's imagination work on that, Nala went on. Humans are fractured into factions much like the Umfaga clans, but the human factions are far more varied than Umfaga clans, and are constantly fighting. Those two ships in orbit were not built to attack the Umfaga, but rather to attack each other. However, when the situation arises, factions will join together as they have here to address a common concern. I believe humans have nightmares about something in the dark that poses an existential threat to all of them at once. I believe the humans are here at your world because they want the Umfaga, the Relati, and every other species they come across to help them fight this threat. Human mythology talks about a united coalition of species. They want us to help them fight a mythical threat that they have no evidence even exists? That's paranoid, exclaimed Zieno. Nala agreed, but paranoid or not, the Umfaga still had to deal with the humans. A member of your species told me that on this planet, there is a large beast called a Thigia. His mother used to tell him, when the Thigia comes, you can ride the Thigia or you can get trampled by it. Droma Zieno, please believe me when I say that the Thigia is here. After a long pause, Droma Zieno asked quietly, Tell me, Ambassador Nala, how do I convince the Umfaga to get onto the Thigia? It was not lost on Nala that this was the very first time Droma Zieno had addressed her by anything other than little morsel. Nala pulled out her datapad and started presenting her plan, providing Zeno with supporting videos, names and data along the way. In the meantime, the two massive battleships in orbit reposition themselves on opposite sides of the planet, and at a good deal lower orbit to maximize their visibility from the ground. In this orbit they could be seen even in broad daylight like small dim moons. Sometime later, Nala was sitting with the security guards on the shuttle, watching a live newscast of Droma Zeno, dressed in her most regal Droma attire, and flanked by her attendants, berating 5 lone humans. Nala knew that all over the planet, average Umphaga were watching the same live newscast. As videos of captured hunter crews played on the screen behind her, Droma Zeno pointed to individual crew members from clans around the planet and called them out by name as if she knew them personally. And all around the planet, watching Umphaga learned for the first time that their loved ones were still alive. The humans offered to repatriate the captives, but Droma Zeno told the humans that, having contaminated them, the humans were now responsible for their safety and welfare and decontamination, and asked what were the humans going to do about that. The humans conferred, and one of them presented survey data of a world 15 light-years away, where they would set up a colony. The Umphaga crews could live there until they were sufficiently decontaminated. All around the planet, the xenophobic extremists saw that they wouldn't have to deal with this, while more progressive Umphaga marveled that they were about to get a second planet. It's a start, stomped Droma Zeno, but our ships can't reach that far, those few that you have left us with. She then demanded that the humans build a spaceport on her lands, where she could keep an eye on them, and that the humans transport home-world agricultural plants and animals so that the colonists would have a chance. Droma Zeno further demanded that the humans would provide transportation of Umphaga back and forth when decontamination allowed it. All around the planet, watching Umphaga got a glimmer of hope that they might see their loved ones again someday. The demands went on and Umphaga all around the planet watched as while other Dromas had cowered before the humans, Droma Zena was making sure their captured loved ones were being taken care of and that the humans knew that the Umphaga would not be oppressed. The grand finale was the moment when Droma Zena demanded that the humans remove those 2 big combat ships from orbit, and all around the planet, Umphaga looked up and watched as the ships receded away into space. On Nala's lap, her datapad was open to the wiki page about a human named Theodore Roosevelt, who long ago laid out the 5 key elements of gunboat diplomacy. Number 5 was to allow the adversary to save face in defeat. Droma Zena and the 5 humans were putting on a great show while the humans got everything they wanted. A month later, aboard the Kilder, Captain Nguyen and Specialist Mwangi sat side by side in the captain's cabin and read their new orders. Again. From Anglo-Euro Union Faction Representative Captain Brad Wilson to AU Kilder Captain Joan Nguyen. The Bantu Republic formally requests that the ambassador and her team provide immediate assistance to the deep space explorer JYB Kumasi. Therefore, Captain Nguyen is hereby ordered to make accommodations for the current 5 members of the ambassador's team and proceed to rendezvous with the JYB Kumasi at the coordinates provided below. Upon rendezvous, the Kilder shall make accommodations for an additional team member, Dr. Irumba Apio. Dr. Apio will brief the ambassador and Kilder senior staff on the situation at that time. The ambassador, capital T, capital A, 3 times in case we missed it, said Joe. Almazy said quietly, Joe, she didn't ask for any of this. She was happy studying small furry endotherms in the forest and we snatched her away. Joe looked at the orders. And I doubt the Kumasi found small furry endotherms either. If it were that pleasant they would have said so. The complete lack of information in these orders suggests that they didn't want to give us the rationale to say no. Almazy trembled a little with fear she was unaccustomed to feeling. I'll have the faction ships near us send over every container of chocolate hazelnut spread they have. She deserves that much.